Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Erich Eickmeyer, project leader for Ubuntu Studio, like I was just introduced as. I tend to talk a little fast. I'm going to slow it down a little bit, but we do have a long way to go before the sun goes down. I've only got a 30-minute workshop today, so just wanted to talk about this, what we have here today, a bit of a problem that we have kind of as a community, and that's that we have a bit of a problem in that as developers, we tend to develop for developers and for ourselves. So just wanted to talk about that a little bit. So what was funny is that as I was browsing Reddit the other day, I actually came across this meme. And you may have seen it before. It's a little bit of thing coming along. Windows 10 is being killed off by Microsoft in October 2025. And, you know, we have an advantage here where we could probably, or a thing where we could probably take advantage of coming up. But we do have a problem in that there's a bias in that people coming into Linux seem to think they have to run stuff from the terminal all the time, or that it's for power users or things like that. Now, personally, I have been working on Ubuntu Studio to try to bring it to the everyday user for the past 6.5 years, and to try and make sure that people can use it and not have to worry about making it complicated. And we finally got to that stage in 2404 where people can just start it up, be ready to go to do professional audio, video, graphics work just out of the box. And it's actually getting a lot of good positive feedback, especially with 24.10 where we have moved to the generic kernel and been able to configure kernel options by default. And I'll show you a bit about that in a little bit later. But I am going to pick on our friends at Fedora. I used to be a Fedora developer, so I can do that. I'm giving myself a little bit of license for that. We'll look at their look a little bit at their web page. This is a little snippet from their web page. This is the Fedora workstation where we're talking about. We'll read that a little bit. Fedora workstation is a polished, easy-to-use operating system for laptop and desktop computers with a complete set of tools for developers and makers of all kinds. I want to highlight that last portion a little bit. With a complete set of tools for developers and makers of all kinds. For developers and makers of all kinds. For developers. So you see where we're going with this? They're targeting developers. They are not targeting the everyday end user, which to me is a little bit problematic. I just, you know, it kind of rubs me the wrong way. My first computer experience was on a Commodore Amiga. And if you're familiar with that, it was an all GUI based thing. If you were in the terminal, you were doing it wrong. All of their configuration was done in a GUI. If you were running anything, it was done in a GUI. If you were programming, you were doing it in a text file, which is, I mean, expected. But, then my first computer that we actually owned, that was my uncle's computer. My first computer that we actually owned was a Commodore 64. I learned how to program on that in BASIC. So if you were following the Summit Matrix channel, you may have seen me goof around with somebody talking about, we were talking about a little bit of old BASIC, and I just called them loopy and told them 10 go to 10 should be their tagline. If you know what that means, that's literally a loop. It literally loops in that code if you run it. So anyhow, so why would we use GUI apps? And yes, the terminal is faster, but only if you know the commands already. For newcomers, being told to go to a terminal is a deterrent. It will be every time, and especially if they're having to do some basic configuration or run something that isn't something that needs to be done every day. Developers, I have noticed, do tend to scratch their own itch and develop for themselves. I do it, and I have caught myself doing it, and I was like, well, actually, this is something that the end user is going to be needing to do. So this is something that we need to be doing, and I need to actually write a front end for. In order for desktop Linux to be considered for everyday computer users, developers need to start developing for non-developers and focus on the graphical user interface. So this saves end user time. How much is your time worth? To think about it. This saves the end user their time. How much is their time worth? And it saves you support costs, because then they're not going to have to hunt through the memorized terminal commands, and you're not going to have to tell them all the time where they're going to have to look for configuration files. So this is where there are actually two tools that you can use that are very basic. There's QDialog and Zenity. They kind of compete with each other, but Zenity is the most featureful. It has the most different options available. They are both, now, this is slightly hypocritical, but I'm getting there. They're both command line tools, but they present a graphical user interface. QDialog does also not look so great on GNOME, especially on default Ubuntu, because the user has to take great strides to configure it to look good for the Ubuntu experience. Like, you have to make some environment variables. So being the technical director for Edubuntu, I have taken some strides to getting the settings correct so that Edubuntu can actually look decent with Qt and KDE apps, because we ship some of those by default. So I'm going to give you a use case where I had somebody who is not technical, in fact, a 12-year-old, who I did not want to give administrator access to our server to run a Minecraft server that he has with his friends from school. And that's my son, Jonathan. Johnny needed a way to start this and stop this Minecraft Bedrock server. It's a non-Java server, and it is run out of our Ubuntu server. And I was not about to give him an admin access to start and stop using a systemd service that I had on our server. So I created a cron job for it to look for a specific file on that server. And if it sees that file, it's going to start the server. If it doesn't see the file, it's going to stop the server. Or if the file doesn't exist, it's not going to do anything. If it sees the file and the server's already running, it's going to start the server. It's going to keep the server running. So I made a solution where the file is created, and then it can be synced with Nextcloud. He has that on his laptop, and then Nextcloud syncs it to the server, and the server sees the file, starts up the service. The app to create it was written in BASH with a front end in Zenity, and it actually runs in Windows Subsystem for Linux. And it was actually very easy to create. And by the way, Bedrock runs most reliably in Windows. You can run it in Linux, but it's very hacky. So I'll show you kind of what it looks like here. This is an exact screenshot of my son's machine. He is a Wild Robot fan, so he has that as his desktop wallpaper. But this is what the Zenity dialog looks like. It's just a couple of radio buttons. He can either start it or stop it. And it will tell him what the state of the server is and whether or not he needs to start it or stop it. And it's his option. And he starts it. It'll create that file. It'll sync. Within a minute, that server starts running, and he's off and running with his friends. So, and there's the code. That's the code that it takes to run it, and you can see it's just checking to see if that file is there or not. And then it's basically creating a variable. And then if that is one option, then it creates the file by executing touch to that file. And if it's not there, or if it's the other option, it removes it. And then it just tells him it'll start within 1 minute, and then it goes, and there is a fail-safe. If it bugs out, it says there's an error has occurred, and that's his cue to come get me. So I do have, if you have your laptops and have Zenity installed, and that's as easy as if you're running Ubuntu, which you probably are if you're at this conference, apt install Ubuntu or apt install Zenity, and we can actually write a simple bunch of code here. You can actually write some Zenity right now, and it will look a lot like that. So I'm going to actually try to, if it will let me. Oh. You can actually write to write that. So let's see if it'll. Oh, darn it! You're supposed to be interactive. Yeah. You know, it's supposed to let me demonstrate that, but it's not being very cooperative. So if you guys want to give that a try, go ahead. We are only, oh gosh, I've already got 15 minutes in. So either way, let's go ahead and skip that part. So the first window is what you would get, and you can type in just hello world. And then the second window is what you'll get back. And then there's multiple options for what you can get. Like, for instance, you can put in a calendar. And if you want to get the date, that's what it comes back with. Or let's do color. We can do a color selection box and get back the RGB color. That RGB color can then be converted to whatever color you want, or even have it output that hash, wherever you would really like to do. It's even file selection dialog, and it comes up with the exact path on the system. And if you don't want it to come up like an information box, you can make a notification, system notification right there and then. So really the options are endless in what you can do with this. And what we've done with Ubuntu Studio and Edubuntu is we have these installers, which are probably going to be renamed customizers in the next version. And these are for installing and uninstalling the meta packages. And you can add and remove meta packages, their dependencies and recommends, using these applications. And for the removal, what we do is we take and we find out which applications are the recommends of these packages, and then we mark them as auto just to make sure, and then we do an auto remove on all of those packages. Now, if there's any, it does have the side effect that if there are any other auto removable packages in the system, those will get auto removed as well. Just if it also means that if your system is doing that, that you have been maintaining your system very well, I will say. So here's the Ubuntu Studio installer, which I again said might be renamed Customizer. It was first written in tk-tcl, which is ancient. You can see it on the upper right-hand corner there. It did not follow any GTK or Qt specifications. Therefore, it always showed up looking like it was from the 90s. And it had a problem that could not scale to high DPI, and that was when the person who created it came to me and said, what can we do about this? So I was just like, it needs a complete rewrite. There's nothing we can do. If we're going to go anywhere with it, it needs to be rewritten. So back last year and a half ago, for 2304, I took on the project, rewrote it in BASH and Zenity. And at the time, I had just been working on a lot of BASH stuff using Q dialog in my previous working with the Ubuntu Focus project. So we had done a lot of that, and so we were doing a lot with that. So it just made a simple transition to take a lot of that knowledge and apply it to this. And also in 2304, we were reviving Edubuntu. My wife is the project lead for that. So we took it upon ourselves to do that, but we also needed some way to install and uninstall meta packages for different age groups. So we did the same thing and created that, but we also made the utility able to change the look and feel based on the age group that was there as well. We may be able to make this able to customize per user in the future. So say you have a 5-year-old or 4-year-old in preschool, a 10-year-old in elementary school or primary school, and a 12-year-old in middle school or secondary school. So you can have one user configured for preschool, one user configured for primary, one configured for secondary, overall look and feel, and have different package groups. And we also have a way to hide and show, and I'll get to that in a minute as well. For Ubuntu Studio, we also have the Ubuntu Studio audio configuration program, which was initially built to configure the Pipewire Quantum. And in 2304 at the time, in 23.10, I had made a command line utility to do that in 2304. But again, this is where I was like, I made a command line utility and I didn't expose it to the users, the end users. So I was just like, okay, I need a front end. So I made it for 23.10, and lo and behold, feature creep happened. So I created this initially to be able to control the quantum, which is the buffer and sample rate. And then I added the ability to start and stop the jack Pipewire interface so that people could use jack on its own. If you don't know what this is, see me afterwards. And then I found out, and then 2404 came around, and we decided to start and stop a dummy audio interface for people who wanted to route their audio so that it didn't interfere with other things. And then for 24.10, because we stopped using the low latency kernel, be able to change the kernel boot parameters so that low latency could be configured on the fly, or not really on the fly, but low latency could be started or configured, and then as you reboot it, it could be either a generic kernel or running on the low latency parameters, and you can see that in the lower window there. So, and this is all being done. The top one just gives you the menu selection, and then the bottom one there, that will actually write a grub drop file configuration for the defaults. Back to Edubuntu, for the menu administration, what this will do this will hide each checked desktop file will be hidden from non-administrator users. What this does is this scans the user share applications and the snap applications for desktop files, checks for what is already hidden in that other directory, which is in user share Edubuntu applications, then figures out, well, and because that directory is hidden for not administrators. It will then overwrite and create desktop files with desktop entry no display equals true for in that Edubuntu applications folder, which comes very last in the path for the non-administrator users. And it sees that desktop file and hides it from the users, so they don't see it in the application overview for GNOME, or even if they were running a different desktop environment, they wouldn't see it in their menu. So, and that can't be changed by the non-administrator users because they would need a password. They would need to be able to basically hack it, and you can't really do that very easily. So that's what we are doing with Zenity. And the code for this, I wanted to show you the code, but I'm having a lot of difficulty with that. So let me see. So I'll do Ubuntu Studio installer real quick. I am starting to run out of time. So here's Ubuntu Studio installer. And as you can see, I define my functions first. Lots of shell check disables because shell check, Oh, any questions came up. Here, let me go ahead and move this. Oh, it's not. You know what? Because I'm a nice guy, I'll just kill that. I'll unify my outputs so I can actually see what I'm doing. All right. So you can see here, I define my functions first. I have a recursive for just used for debugging. Then we'll go down here, and this is the auto package remove function. Now, we use QApp batch in here. That's the only Qt app we actually use for it. We do this sleep thing because it takes a little while to build the array that actually creates the menu that you see at first in Ubuntu Studio installer. And this is true for Edubuntu installer as well. And it is declaring an array of packages we want to look at and examine, and then creates a table here. And these two lines here are a bug. I need to remove those, and looks like I'm going to be filing an SRU tomorrow. So then it comes up with, and you can see the Zenity command here, and it does it inside a subshell, because what we're doing is we're creating a variable. And it is creating that variable from the output of this command, and then it is taking the array that we just built based on all of this junk that we just did here, building this array, and we're building this array based on whether or not we're getting an error here from dpackage -s to test whether or not that meta package is actually installed. And if it's installed, it's going to come back with an error. It's going to not come back with an error. If it is not installed, it'll come back with an error, and then we have a false. And that will help us build this table, and it will come up with the actual application. So we'll go ahead and run it real quick. So here's QApp batch running real quick. Now it does this just because it takes a little while to build that table, and here we go. This is what it looks like. Now I can uncheck and recheck or what have you. I don't have the music education bundle here, but that's okay. Just wanted to give you guys kind of an idea of where we're at so far. I don't actually want to do anything right now because that could be, changing my system. You can kind of see what we're doing here. Now, there is a little bit here where it has to kind of compare the output of the selected package here, create an array out of it, and then compare that to what was checked before and figure out what was unchecked or what was checked, figure out what was added and subtracted. And it has to do a comparison, and then it will figure out what it needs to install or uninstall based on that. And it's very tricky to get BASH to do that. So if you ever want to figure out this code, you can look on launchpad/Ubuntu Studio -installer, and the code is all there. You're more than welcome to look there. So, and it gives people a whole lot more information that way. Next thing I want to look at, I'm going to discard my changes because that would be bad to change. We'll look at audio config. And this is one of those things where it has to run itself recursively too in order to, actually it runs this as part of a user systemd file, which starts at login in order to load some Pulse audio modules in order to start and stop that dummy audio module that I was talking about. Then there's the quantum settings that I was talking about, which are all right here. Then we're going to write those parameters upon boot, and it writes it into an etc file, so etc config file. Here's where it's just checking to see if whether or not the user is configured by default to be able to do it, and whether or not they're in the audio group. And of course, we've always got the classic bail out whether or not there's an error. If there's an error, then it will just bail out and say there's a problem, in which case they can always contact support. And it looks like I'm about out of time, so I'm going to take this time. We are actually moving on to break, I believe. So if you do have any questions, I guess, yes, go ahead. Sadly, so here's the problem, right? Localization is very hard to do in BASH. So as far as localization goes, I'm still working on the ability to do that. However, it's not out of the realm of possibility. Is something that I have spoken to people last year at the summit in Riga about. And I am very much interested in figuring out how to do, and I failed to take notes at the time. So here we are, still without localization 1 year later. And I do apologize. I wish I could get some localization done on that. Any other questions? Yes?
Is there any reason this is only for Ubuntu Studio and Edubuntu and not just for regular Ubuntu, like the meta packages style?
So you can actually install any of this, and it's available in the repositories, and have all of the benefits of those available to install. For instance, if you install Ubuntu Studio Installer, you'll get configured right away, and then you can pick and choose what applications or meta packages you want straight from Ubuntu Studio Installer. Yes, Mike.
So this is obviously a great way to get a GUI on something that would normally be a simple command line or two.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a guideline on where you draw the line between using this and then maybe moving into a more complex application framework? Is there like some sort of guideline that you'd like to provide?
You know, I really don't have a guideline for that, but people have been coming to me with some other GUIs that they have mocked up. And so we're kind of in the review process on those for like configuration, audio configuration. There has been a gentleman who has come to me with a mock-up for what we would like to do, and taking it to the next level with PyQt. So there's potential there as well. So taking it to the next level. So there's potential to, this is like a stepping stone to taking it to the next step. So, yeah, like I'm saying, this is just giving it a first step into making it a bigger GUI if you ever get to that far. Now, my problem is I can only code in BASH. Better than, I'm sorry?
It's better than no GUI.
Yeah, some GUI is better than no GUI, absolutely. Any other questions? All right. Thanks, everyone.